Hello, everyone, and welcome to the NSF Improving Undergraduate STEM Education, or IUSE, program webinar for today. We're going to be covering a lot of ground about the IUSE program and answering a number of your questions, as many as we possibly can. Just a few housekeeping things before we get started. I'll introduce myself. I'm Mike Ferrara. I'm a program officer in the Division of Undergraduate Education. I'm the strand lead for IUSE in mathematics and the separate data science strand. I'll be presenting about the first half of our presentation today and then handing it over to my colleague Keith Sverdrup, who is the lead for the IUSE program. So just so that you know, this session is being recorded. So you are, by participating, you are giving permission to record your questions and your comments. Just a few other items. We really want to encourage you to ask your questions. So there is the ask a question function. Please go ahead and put in your questions. We're going to be trying to answer those in two ways. We have a few program officers standing by that will be answering some of those questions in the text box. We're also going to try to curate as many of the questions that we're seeing coming in pervasively, and we're going to answer some of those live at the end of the slide presentation. Okay. AAAS is going to provide us with an Excel file with all of the questions that you ask, even the ones we can't get to, and we will do our best to address especially major groups of unanswered questions. If there are any questions about connectivity or the platform, Workcast, who's our webinar partner provider, is going to be able to answer those for you. It's really important at the end of the webinar, if you could please complete the post-webinar survey. There's a link provided in the Resources tab, which is near the Q&A tab for you. And it was also going to pop up as you exit the webinar. This feedback is really helpful for us and for our partners at AAAS to help better understand how to serve you, our community. Additionally, if you look at that resources section of your page, you're also going to be able to find the Iu Solicitation, which has a whole bunch of information. We always suggest that proposers read the solicitation carefully. It's going to have the AAAS IUSE Proposal Preparation Toolkit. Going to have contact information for all the IUSE program officers, and we love to hear from the community and to answer your questions. And again, that post-webinar survey, which is really an important part of today, just so we can get your feedback. Okay, so just a quick overview of our agenda, and then we'll get down to it. I'm going to give you an overview of the IUSE program. I'm going to talk a little bit about the tracks, levels, and workshop and conference submissions. We're going to pause just to remind you and to encourage you to keep getting those questions into the Q&A box. Then I'm going to pass it off to Keith. He's going to talk about the program expectations, the NSF review criteria, and then we're going to turn it over to, hopefully at least the second half, if not a bit longer, of the afternoon. We'll be answering as many questions live as we can while continuing to answer some of them in the text box. Okay, so as I said, we'll start with an introduction to the IUSE program. So IUSE is really a very broad program. It's the signature program in the Division of Undergraduate Education. And you can see its breadth by looking at our two goals here: improving the quality and effectiveness of education of undergraduates in all STEM fields, and improving undergraduate STEM teaching and learning for all students, or improving the institution in which STEM teaching and learning occurs. So who can apply? We are very happy to field IUSE proposals from any type of institution of higher education and from professional societies and organizations that work with or represent institutions of higher education. If you can see this chart, you'll see that IUSE funds a breadth of different types of institutions. We are always excited to see more submissions from community colleges, primarily undergraduate institutions. We're always keen to grow that part of the portfolio as well, but we really do represent every different type of place that STEM education is happening in our country, and we would like to continue to do that. So just a little bit about how the IUSE program is broken down and organized. So we really have, we have two program tracks: engaged student learning and institutional and community transformation. So you can be sort of guided by the names, but just to give you an overview. Engaged student learning is looking at developing, testing, using of teaching practices, curricular innovations that are going to engage students and improve learning, persistence, and retention in STEM for both STEM majors and non-STEM majors. And the institutional and community transformation track is really looking, that transformation word is key, is looking at how colleges, universities, departments implement and sustain and go through that change process to really grab hold of effective STEM teaching and learning strategies at a larger scale and at a longer lasting scale, hopefully. So just a little bit more about engaged student learning. It improves on, it focuses on improving student learning. Student is key. If you're not sure which track and you're really drilling down on the student and their learning, either directly or indirectly, that's probably an ESL project. It supports the development of improved instructional materials and/or methods. We often see projects that do one or both. And it aims to engage students, improve learning, and increase retention, degree completion, engagement in STEM. This is intentionally very broad. We'll talk a little bit more about this. If you take a look at the NSF award search, you will see all kinds of innovations in the Engaged Student Learning track of the Ius program, and we really encourage you to be creative because there are so many different ways that you can engage students in learning and work in this broad area. And we're sure you have great ideas that we have not thought of yet or heard of yet, and we'd love to hear them from you. So just talking to that breadth, just some things, and again, don't think that these are the only things, but just some things that we see in the ESL strand. Development of novel instructional methods and instructional technologies, design and assessment of metrics to measure STEM teaching and learning, so instrument development, things of that type. Faculty learning through professional development, and discipline-based or interdisciplinary education research. There's a myth that we hear out there sometimes that IUSE is not a research program. That's not true. We are very interested in undergraduate STEM education research. We are interested in re-envisioning, adapting, being creative with learning environments, co-curricular activities that are going to increase student motivation, persistence, retention, that are going to really help students grab onto STEM outside of the main locus of the classroom. Syntheses or meta-analyses of prior work. There's been a lot of data collected, and putting it all together is something that we think is very interesting. And then collaborations between 2-year and 4-year institutions to develop innovative pathways for transfer and student success, right? Sometimes those transition points are really opportunities to make sure that we don't lose students, that students can kind of smoothly move from one setting to another and continue that learning that they started in one institution. Okay, let's see here. There we go. Okay, so there are 3 levels of ESL projects. Okay, so level 1 is up to $300,000 and up to 3 years, and that's really the exploratory stage. Exploratory research projects, adapting existing pedagogies and methodologies in novel environments, but on a smaller scale. So maybe not a mini pilot, but something that's not doesn't need to cut across large swaths of students. $300,000, there's a lot you can do with it, but there's also a lot of things that fall outside of that, and that's what our level 2 and level 3 projects are for. So level 2 projects, which go from $300,000 to $600,000, and again, up to 3 years in duration. And that supports design and development efforts that are still about improving student learning, but maybe looking at department-wide efforts, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary collaborations, and larger partnerships across institutions. So certainly, I just want to make it clear, we certainly see collaborative level 1 projects. We certainly see some beautiful interdisciplinary level 1 projects. And it's really up to you to decide which of these 3 levels fits your idea. Don't write to, our advice is generally don't write to a level. Think about what it is that you want to accomplish. Figure out what a reasonable budget is for that, and let that guide you to a level. And it's perfectly fine to start a little smaller and build up. We see a lot of projects that are continuations of earlier efforts that have grown because of their successes. And then level 3 are our large projects between $600,000 and $2 million in up to 5 years. And these are really, again, the much larger efforts. Benefits a large number of students, very broad communities, and instructive faculty, students, large-scale design and development, and high-impact research. We really do want to emphasize that the knowledge generation is a critically important part, in particular, of level 3 projects. We really want to see well-developed research plans, significant research questions, or really large-scale, deep evaluation efforts. That's really important, particularly at level 3. So institutional community transformation, again, that transformation is a key word. It's really focusing on improving evidence-based instruction by departments, institutions, or other organizations. And one of the things we're really interested is understanding how effective and durable change happens. And we see a lot of projects that look at that. And to that point, a really critical part of any size institutional and community transformation project is that it should be centered on an appropriate theory of change. Okay, it's not just, well, change will happen because people want to change. There's a really beautiful change literature out there, and we really like to see these proposals build upon that literature as sort of a way to suggest the way you, as a proposer, think that the mechanics of change will happen. So again, transformation can happen in many, many ways, even when pinned to the theoretical literature. And you know, I'm going to give you just some examples, but there are many, many other wonderful ways that you could design an ICT project, and we encourage you to be creative. Your innovation is really what drives the field forward and what we're here to support. But some examples of ICT, transformation of high enrollment classes to include evidence-based teaching practices, development of teaching evaluation rubrics rooted in a research-based framework. So developing of faculty communities of practice to improve accessibility or sustainability of evidence-based practices. Sometimes these things get going, and then we look to find ways the faculty can lean on each other and work together and sort of share successes and challenges. Identifying best practices that guide institutional transformation. That gets back to what I was saying about us really being interested in understanding the mechanics of transformation, the mechanics of change. We really encourage the inclusion of all different types of faculty, tenure track, non-tenure track, instructors, graduates, TAs, all different folks, looking at policies and professional development that can drive change across your entire instructional staff. And then identification, looking across disciplines of common elements or programs or systems that can support underrepresented students. Students from underrepresented groups, I'm sorry, not underrepresented students, but populations that are often not as highly represented in STEM as they're represented in the U.S. population. So moving forward, just to sort of drill down a little bit more on what we're looking for in some of these ICT proposals, again, the theory of change is critical. There was a wonderful session yesterday about theory of change as part of this whole IU summer program. So if you weren't able to attend, I believe that it will be available, a recording will be available. It should include research literature and theoretical perspectives concerning change. Okay, so that ties back to the theory of change. It should recognize that, as I think many of us know, STEM higher ed is a very complex system. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot going on. And it should include teams of faculty members. It should have the support of administrators at all different levels, from department chairs to deans, all the way up to provosts or presidents, depending on the scale of the effort. Some large-scale change efforts really do need consistent and strong buy-in from the top. So just to talk a little bit about the levels for the ICT projects, we do have a capacity building strand, which is a little bit newer in the program, but is a wonderful opportunity. It's $150,000 for a single institution, or $300,000 for multiple institutions. This is for up to 2 years. And it enables institutions that have not yet been able to lead an ICT effort through the IUSE program to identify and develop a project of interest. And then we have our level 1 proposals, which look a little bit like the ESLs. They're up to $300,000 and up to 3 years in duration. And these are, again, smaller scale, early stage institutional community transformation projects. These can be centered in a lot of different places, but often are going to be a little smaller than our level 2s, which are our largest investments in ICT. $300,000 to $2 million for a single institution, or up to $3 million for a collaborative project, and up to 5 years. And it supports the design and development work that looks at really large-scale change across, the whole of an institution, a large consortium of institutions. We've seen projects that look at driving change more widely in disciplines in certain ways, things of that type. So just a quick summary. I'll leave this up here. I'll let everyone soak it in. 2 tracks: engaged student learning. Again, engaged student learning is all about student is the key word there. Engaged and learning are also quite important, of course. 3 levels. Level 1 is up to $300,000 and up to 3 years. Those are our more exploratory, introductory projects. Level 2 is $300,000 to $600,000 and up to 3 years. And then our large-scale level 3s, $600,000 to $2 million and up to 5 years. And then the institutional and community transformation track. Again, the transformation is a key word there. It's about spreading and scaling evidence-based practices, building off of a well-defined theory of change, and really we're also, again, very keen on understanding the mechanics of how change can happen and be sustained in higher education, specifically, of course, in STEM. So 3 different levels here as well. Capacity building projects. If you've not previously been able to lead an ICT effort through IUSE, your institution hasn't, you can apply for a capacity building grant. Level 1s, which are up to $300,000 and up to 3 years, and then our larger scale investments at level 2, $300,000 to $2 million for a single institution, or $3 million for a multiple institution project, and both of those level 2s are up to 5 years, looking to drive that larger scale change. So program deadlines, we have 2 program deadlines. This has changed recently. Level 1, 2, 3, and capacity building proposals are accepted on July 21st, 2021. Okay, and then the 3rd Wednesday in July thereafter. And our second deadline is in late January. The next one will be January 19th, looking at those level 1 capacity building projects. STEM also is always interested in fielding workshop and conference proposals. There's a lot of different things that can be accomplished through workshops and conferences. We want to look at, as it says, the critical challenges in undergraduate STEM education. And we're happy to field these at any time. Depending on the size and the scale of the workshop or conference, these typically are between 20,000 and 100,000. We will sometimes see smaller and sometimes larger, but generally that's where we're looking for workshop and conference budgets. One important thing, if you have an idea for a conference proposal, please reach out to one of our program staff. If it's discipline-based, preferably one of the program officers in that specific discipline, to have a conversation about what your idea is before you submit the proposal. Generally, they're going to ask you to send a 1 to 2 page summary of what you're hoping to accomplish, and they'll probably ask you some questions about who might be involved and what some outcomes might be. And that'll kind of help, hopefully help give you some important feedback before you submit. So just to call out, as I said, workshops and conferences can cover a lot of ground, but to call out one thing that we're particularly interested in, conferences and workshop proposals that address diversity in STEM teaching and learning, and those that involve collaborations between education researchers and disciplinary scientists to sort of make sure that STEM teaching and learning reflects cutting-edge disciplinary research. Both of those foci are particularly encouraged. Those are places where we think that there's a lot of wonderful opportunities, and we'd love to hear how you might approach them. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground. I'm gonna take another pause here. Just as a reminder, the video will be provided to you at the end, so if you feel like you've missed anything, of course you can ask a question, but you'll also have an opportunity to review this. Also, I just want to encourage you, I can see over here now that I'm looking at the question box for the first time that they're coming in fast and furious, and I think that's wonderful. Please keep sending in your questions in the Ask a Question tab. As I mentioned, after Keith goes through his piece of the presentation, we're then going to, in addition to continuing to answer some of the questions in writing, we're going to take some of the most common questions or themes that we're seeing and amalgamate them, and we'll have some folks that will be able to answer some of those live. So I just want to thank you for listening to the first half of our slide, and I'm going to turn it over to Keith.
Okay, thanks very much, Mike. So we're going to talk a little bit about the program expectations for IUs in this next section of the webinar. Next slide, please. The Ius program has multiple goals. We have 3 of them listed here. The first is to build knowledge about STEM teaching and learning at the undergraduate level. And we envision this being done by projects that develop novel, creative, and transformative approaches to undergraduate STEM teaching and learning. A second goal is to incorporate evidence-based practices in STEM teaching and learning for all undergraduate students. And projects are able to do this by adapting, improving, replicating, and including evidence-based practices in STEM teaching and learning. And a third goal is to build and understand systemic change in undergraduate STEM education by laying the groundwork for sustained departmental, institutional, or community transformation and improvement. Next slide, please. Could you advance one more for me, Mike? Oh, okay. Mike, if you could find the gaining new knowledge slide.
Yes, sir, Keith.
Thank you.
Are you able to see that?
There we are, perfect. So we expect every IUSE project to produce new knowledge. And this new knowledge can be kind of tackled or approached in one of a couple of different ways, either by projects that pose research questions that they then investigate through the lifetime of the project, or through the careful evaluation of project activities and impacts and outcomes. And this evaluation should be both formative and summative. Next slide, please. So when we look at successful IUSE proposals as they come in and are reviewed by your peers, there are some things that we see repeated, basically, in those proposals that are the strongest. Successful proposals are those that build on what is already known, summarizing literature, building on a foundation of research that has come before, and also identifying holes in our knowledge. Basically, a successful project will not only hearken back to what has already been done, but identify what needs to be examined then in the future. Successful projects also have methods of analysis that they will employ to answer those questions and include mechanisms to evaluate the success of the project. I mentioned before that evaluation efforts for strong proposals or strong projects should be both formative and summative. The fact of the matter is that many IUSE projects during the lifetime of the project discover that through formative evaluation, they change direction slightly, discovering that there are perhaps other questions that need to be answered, or that there are other areas of investigation that become available from what they're learning. Successful proposals also explain how the findings and materials produced during that project will be shared and disseminated outside of the institution that has the grant. And they will also address the sustainability of project efforts. We like to think that NSF provides seed money for organizations, but many of these projects will have to be sustained at their institutions long term. We also see a fair amount of collaboration on many successful IUSE projects. This collaboration isn't absolutely necessary, but certainly when it's needed to either bring in other investigators or institutions or communities, it's something that lends a little more impact to the project. Next slide, please. So, methods of analysis. Well, it's very important to align the research and evaluation methods with the questions that are being posed. Remember, one of the ways to generate new knowledge is to pose research questions. And in doing so, it's critically important to make sure that the methods of analysis being used are designed to address them. It's also important to keep in mind that when you select appropriate methods to perform the study, they can be of different kinds. They may be qualitative methods, they may be quantitative methods, or oftentimes we see a mixture of both. Next slide, please, Mike. So we've put together some commonly asked questions, and we're going to take a quick IUSE fact check here and see whether or not these questions are true or false. First, all proposals must have a research component. No, that's false. We don't require research in all proposals, but we do require the generation of new knowledge. It's important to keep that in mind. Question 2, STEM curriculum development, programmatic pathways, learning resources, assessment instruments, and faculty development all can be aspects of a funded proposal. Yes, this is absolutely true. Mike was mentioning earlier that IUSE is a very diverse program, and we want it to be a very diverse program because we recognize that you in the community are kind of at the forefront of creating these new projects. We like to see that creativity. Question 3, proposals may focus on both STEM and non-STEM majors. Absolutely. We would like to see improved education in STEM for all undergraduate students, whether they are STEM majors themselves or not. Question 4, proposals may focus solely on students in a single discipline. Yes, this is true. We see proposals that focus on a single discipline. We see proposals that focus on multiple disciplines. We see proposals that are truly interdisciplinary. All of these are eligible for funding. Next slide, please, Mike. Question 5, an evaluation plan that provides formative and summative assessment of the effectiveness of the project in achieving its goals is required. Yes, that's true. We do require evaluation of projects. This evaluation can be done by outside independent evaluators. It can be done by members of the project team. It can be guided by an outside group of advisors. There are many different ways to accomplish this. We simply encourage you to create a sound evaluation plan with qualified people who can carry it out. Question 6, proposals should demonstrate a solid grounding in relevant literature on STEM teaching and learning. Yes, absolutely. I mentioned earlier that it's very important to ground your project in what is already known and to demonstrate that the project itself will address gaps in our knowledge and thus create new knowledge as a result of the project. Question 7, only colleges and universities may submit proposals. No, this is false. All categories of proposers in the PAPPG are eligible to submit proposals to IUSE. This can include professional societies. It can include for-profit companies. It can include nonprofit organizations. all eligible organizations who can submit to NSF can submit to the IUSE program. Next slide, please, Mike. So we have a list of things here. People sometimes ask us, can any of these receive IUSE funding? We've got a list of 6 different things that people typically ask us about, and the answer is all of these can receive IUSE funding. Using and building evidence about improved instructional practices, investigating novel tools and learning systems, creating, implementing, and testing program, curricular, course, and technology-driven models for STEM teaching and learning. Developing, implementing, and testing creative approaches for adoption of education research into disciplinary teaching. Developing and validating assessments or metrics for undergraduate learning and instructional practice, and propagating and sustaining transformative and effective STEM teaching and learning through institutional practices or involvement of professional societies. These are all examples of things that IUSE projects in the past have had as a focus of their research and their work. And certainly as we go into the future, all of these would be eligible for funding as well. Next slide, please, Mike. So once again, I just want to remind you that we're encouraging you to enter questions in the question box. As Mike said, I'm seeing lots of questions coming in. Very happy about that. So let's continue just a bit more. So next slide, please, Mike. Okay, in this section of the webinar, I'd like to talk a little bit about the NSF merit review criteria, intellectual merit and broader impacts. NSF has an advisory group called the National Science Board, and some years ago, the National Science Board dictated that there should be 2 review criteria for NSF proposals, intellectual merit and broader impacts. As a part of that decision, the National Science Board said that each of these review criteria should be weighted equally. So it isn't a fact that intellectual merit counts more than broader impacts or vice versa. NSF wants to see these treated with equal weight. Next slide, please, Mike. So what exactly do we mean when we talk about intellectual merit and broader impacts? Well, when we address intellectual merit, we're basically asking the question, what do we stand to learn from the work that is going to be done? What's the potential for the proposed activity to advance our knowledge and advance our understanding of best practices in undergraduate STEM education, either in individual disciplines or across disciplines or in interdisciplinary ways? What will we learn? Broader impacts, what does this mean? Well, broader impacts address the question, why is this work important to society? What's the potential for benefiting society or advancing desired societal outcomes? Next slide, please, Mike. There are other review considerations, certainly, that we as program officers consider and we encourage reviewers to consider as well. These include such things as to what extent do the activities that are proposed within the proposal explore creative, original, or potentially transformative concepts? Is the plan that's described in the proposal for carrying out activities well-reasoned? Is it well-organized and based on a sound rationale? Does the plan include a mechanism to assess success? How well qualified is the individual or the team or the institution to conduct the proposed activities? And are there adequate resources available to the PI? either at their home institution or perhaps through collaborating institutions to carry out the proposed activities. Next slide, please, Mike. So sometimes people ask us, is a certain aspect of this project intellectual merit, or does it count for broader impacts? Where does it fall within these two criteria? We're going to take a look at just a couple of examples here, one for intellectual merit and one for broader impacts. Imagine that you are a reviewer and you're reading a proposal, and in the proposal it says, in addition to development and implementation of a novel curriculum, the project will include educational research to uncover new information about undergraduate model-based reasoning through detailed assessment of classroom learning. Well, this falls under the intellectual merit review criterion. And you can tell that that's the case because it is talking about uncovering new information, creating new knowledge, answering that question, what do we stand to learn from this project? Next slide, please, Mike. Imagine that you read in the proposals, activities planned will provide in-depth faculty development through a national series of workshops and an expansion of an ongoing national study of the effectiveness of this approach for learning about the nature of science. This would fall under the broader impact review criterion. And you can tell this is the case because this talks about providing information through a series of national workshops that would then extend what was learned in the project beyond the home institution. There would be an expansion of the knowledge gained, broadening the impact of the project beyond the school that had the grant. Okay, if you could advance one more for me then, Mike. So once again, I'm going to encourage you to keep putting questions in the box, but this is the end of the formal presentation part of our slides. And so I know that our colleagues have been answering some of the questions as they've come in, but at this point, we have time to take some of your questions and we'll try to answer them verbally as well. So, John, if you're available.
Sure. Okay. First one, is there a formal rule or informal culture that if you win a phase 2 in engaged student learning, that you should not consider submitting a following, I'm assuming they mean level 3 and level 2, a level 3 in community transformation?
Well, thank you for that question. No, there is no culture that would dictate that. There is no unwritten understanding. I think what I would say is imagine that your focus, your personal focus or the focus of your team, let's imagine that your focus is in the engaged student learning track, just as an example. There are 3 levels in that track, level 1, level 2, level 3. You might start immediately with a level 2 project and then perhaps go on to a level 3 project. You might start at a level 1, build on that to a level 2, level 3. All of that is possible. You could imagine, for instance, having a very successful level 2 project that focused on one particular aspect of undergraduate STEM education, and then you decided that you wanted to change your focus to something very different, but still in the engaged student learning track. but in order to begin work in it, it would make more sense for you to have a level 1. So you could go from a level 2 to a level 1 if you kind of change direction. You have a lot of freedom, a lot of flexibility. John, another question?
Yeah, comes from a community college wondering if they should submit to the program description for the 2-year colleges versus the IUSE program.
Okay, that's a very good question. You can do either. The program description basically is a tool that we have used to encourage more submissions from community colleges. The IUSE program itself certainly does not put any limitations on who can submit. But we have learned in the last couple of years that fewer community colleges have applied to IUSE than we expected, than we hoped, and consequently we released the program description as a means of encouraging community colleges to consider submitting to IUSE. So that really was our intent in that program description.
Okay. Here's a question. Must an IUSE Track 2 institutional and community transformation proposal include activities that address the Engaged Student Learning Track 1 topic?
No. These two tracks, you can think of the two tracks as being a Venn diagram with some overlap, but clearly there are areas where there is no overlap. The real intent here is for engaged student learning projects to be focused on the student, and for institutional and community transformation projects to be focused more on departments, colleges, universities, groups, faculty cohorts. So it's really a difference in focus. That's not to say that an institutional community transformation project wouldn't impact students. Certainly it should impact students, but there's no expectation that there will be direct overlap between the two.
Okay, here's one on theory of change. Could you suggest a source for theory of change literature for novices?
I almost wish that we had other program officers whose area of expertise was that, who could join us. I think I would suggest reaching out to other people at your institution, even perhaps in schools of education, where they may be working directly with various theories of change. Other program officers who are on the line, do you have other suggestions? No. So here's the other thing I would say. If you are unsure of how to proceed, and if you know, for instance, that you will be focusing in a specific disciplinary area, take a look at the Iu Solicitation. As you go towards the bottom of the solicitation, there will be a list of all of the program officers who work on Ius by their kind of disciplinary area of expertise. And please feel free to contact them and ask if you can talk a little bit more about the program and how you might be able to work with it. It's often helpful to speak with a program officer in your same disciplinary area, which is why I encourage you to look at the list. So that would be my other suggestion.
Okay. For engaged student learning, level 1, would a pilot study be necessary or helpful?
I'm assuming the question is, would a pilot study prior to awarding the level 1 help in having the level 1 proposal be competitive? I think that's the sense of the question. Well, here's how I would answer that. The intent of a level 1 engaged student learning really is to provide enough funding for a long enough period of time for a PI team to begin an investigation or to begin a project at sort of an introductory level. I think personally that if you have some sort of prior work that you can refer to in a proposal, that helps for any level, whether it's a level 1, level 2, or level 3. If you can explain that there is some foundational work you have already been able to conduct, that can be helpful, but it certainly is not necessary. It's not necessary. Many people, I think, look at level 1 projects as the foundational work that would then position you for a level 2 project. And that certainly makes good sense. What is important, however, even if you don't have prior work yourself that is informing the project, what is important is that you be aware of and reference prior work done in the field. Have a literature base that supports your proposal, that supports your identification of a gap in knowledge that you will address in your proposal. You can use the existing literature as kind of prior work in that sense.
Okay. In what way is the IUSE institutional transformation track different from the NSF Advance program with its institutional transformation?
Well, NSF has many different programs. I think the key here is, if you are unsure which program you should submit to, I would strongly suggest two things. Number one, I would strongly suggest reading the solicitations very carefully. For the most part, solicitations are very good at describing what the intent of the program is, what the goals of the program are. Solicitations are sometimes long. I will admit that. There's a lot of information in them. But if you read them carefully, I think that you can make distinctions between different programs that sometimes may have similar terminology in them. I would also encourage you, if you're unsure, to contact the program officers who work in the programs. Contact a program officer in advance, in the advanced program, and contact a program officer in IUSE to learn more about them. But the very first thing you should do, I really can't recommend this enough, is read the solicitation in detail. because it's always easier and more efficient if you're talking with a program officer to have specific questions in mind.
Okay. Regarding conferences and workshop proposals, did you provide deadlines?
Well, conference and workshop proposals are two special types of proposals that can be submitted at any time of the year. The NSF policy, as it's explained in the PAPPG, is that they can be submitted throughout the year, but you should contact a program officer before submitting it to discuss what your idea is for the conference or the workshop ahead of time. So we basically require you to contact a program officer ahead of time, but they can be submitted at any time of the year.
Okay. So here's a question about institutional community transformation proposal. So they want to involve a university system and a K through 12 system. Focus on improving how high schools and universities prepare and launch students at the university. Is that something that would be within the scope of IUSE?
Well, that's a good question, and I think the answer to that question would depend on the exact nature of the design of the project. That's a question that I honestly don't feel very comfortable answering in this format. I would very much encourage the person who asked that to send us an email, to contact us directly, tell us a little bit more about what you have in mind, and I think we would be better positioned to answer it. And the reason I'm saying that is the Ius program really has a primary focus on undergraduate education. That is not to say that we don't fund projects that include elements of K-12 involvement. We do. We definitely do. We even fund proposals that have elements of graduate involvement. But the primary focus is undergraduate education. So before I made a blanket answer to that specific question, I'd really like to know more about exactly what was planned.
Okay, for generating new knowledge slide that was presented, what would you consider activities?
What would I consider activities? Okay, so the slide.
I think you're looking for examples of what would constitute knowledge generating activity.
What would constitute a knowledge generating activity? Okay, so when I look at the slide, we mentioned that one way to gain new knowledge in a project is through the evaluation of project activities. Let's imagine that you have a project, an engaged student learning project that involved the testing of some new pedagogical methodology in the classroom. It may be a methodology that has already been explored in the past, but you have now adapted it, you've modified it, perhaps to be more suitable either at your institution or for a specific demographic of students. So you've modified this. It's an activity that has some history, but it's different now. Well, presumably, you want to know whether or not that modification, those changes have led to some improvement now in teaching and learning, either at that school or for those students. Well, if it was engaged student learning, it would be for the students. And so you're going to have to evaluate that. You implement it. You may implement it in one or more courses for multiple semesters or years. And through that implementation, now you need to evaluate it through formative evaluation, after each semester, after each academic year, and ultimately through summative evaluation at the end of the project. And that evaluation activity will presumably tell you whether or not you had some success. And that will be the generation then of new knowledge for the community. I hope that that's answering the question that was posed.
Okay. Are studies of student motivation considered within the scope of IUSE?
Yes, they are. We certainly see studies of student motivations, studies that introduce and test new means or new ways of helping students self-identify as STEM majors or potentially as STEM professionals. Beyond a shadow of a doubt, yes, we've funded projects like that in the past. I think it's more than fair to say that there is still much to be learned, so I would certainly anticipate proposals related to that being submitted in the future and very strong competitive proposals being funded.
Okay. Here's one where someone wants to know the difference between the IUSE program and Ius HSI program.
Well, let me try to begin answering that by saying that IUSE, the acronym IUSE, as you all know, stands for Improved STEM Undergraduate Education. IUSE was a program that initially was created in the Education and Human Resources Directorate. And then through a pervasive interest in improving STEM education by all of the directorates, there were offshoots of the IUSE program or new programs similar to IUSE that were developed and exist now in different directorate homes. Sometimes in a single directorate, there may be offshoots in different divisions. So the IUSE HSI program is an offshoot of this kind of foundational IUSE program, and it focuses on students at Hispanic serving institutions. So you could say really that the two programs have the same goals, they have the same expectations in general, but IUSE HSI has a very specific demographic focus because of a proven need in that area and a desire to increase funding in that area and increase the involvement of HSIs.
Okay, does NSF fund proposals that are similar to recently funded IUSE proposals?
I would say yes. And I think the reason we do is because we know that advancement in STEM undergraduate education is incremental. You know, if I was a mathematician, I'm not. If I was a mathematician, I'd say that improvement in undergraduate STEM education could be graphed as a line with a positive slope. We don't graph it as a Heaviside function, for instance. It isn't zero and then suddenly in an instant it has some value. So progress is incremental. Sometimes it's more rapid and those increments are a little greater. Sometimes problems or issues are, I won't say intractable, but they are difficult, they are complicated, and it's necessary to kind of chip away at them. So yes, we do fund projects that are similar. Now, what I will say is that we like to see innovation. We like to see some creativity. We try not to be too prescriptive in the solicitation. We try not to give you a checklist of this is what your project must do, because we recognize that you are out there at the forefront of STEM education. You are the STEM education researchers. You're the experts. We look to you for your great ideas. But a project can be similar. Presumably, it's not going to be identical. There's no point in doing that. One thing I will point out, though, is that NSF has a policy whereby if you submit a proposal and that proposal is declined, if you resubmit the proposal, NSF expects that resubmission to be different, and sometimes the word substantially is used, different from the original submission. So you can kind of translate that back to the original question. Do we fund similar things? Yeah, we fund similar things, but they should be substantially different.
Okay. Does an IUSE project require, or does NSF require that IUSE projects have external evaluators?
No. You know, this, I might go off topic just for a minute here. It's kind of interesting. NSF has certain rules and requirements that are published in the PAPPG. And we strongly encourage you to be familiar with the PAPPG, Proposal Award and Policy Guide, Proposal Award and Preparation Policy Guide. And the easiest way to find it, by the way, is simply to Google PAPPG, all caps, space, 20-1. That will get you to the current version of the PAPPG, which is revised every year. And when the new version comes out, it will be 21-1 and then 22-1, etc. Anyway, what I was saying was that NSF has certain rules and regulations. You'll find them in the PAPPG, but they give a lot of leeway to individual programs to define their own specific program rules and regulations. So NSF doesn't have any requirement for external evaluation on the part of IUSE. IUSE as a program has certain expectations about evaluation. And basically, the IUSE expectation is that every project will have an evaluation plan. It will have a means of evaluating the success of the project, the success of products produced by the project. Now, who can do that evaluation? There was a time when we said, please don't focus on the word external, focus on the word independent. And so for a period of time, we required that an evaluation had to be conducted by a person who was independent. In other words, a person who wasn't actively participating as a part of the project team. But in the newest Iu Solicitation, we've expanded that somewhat. So now we recognize that evaluators may be independent. It could be that that is their one and only role in the project, or evaluation can be done by a member of the project team. The evaluator might be someone from a different institution, that's fine. They may be from the home institution, that is also fine. Basically what we are looking for is a strong evaluation plan and an evaluator who is highly qualified to conduct the evaluation. So if you have those two, highly qualified, a strong plan, that's really what we're trying to focus on in project evaluation.
Okay, here's a related question. If a project is using the project evaluation to generate new knowledge, should they completely omit the relevant research questions in the proposal?
Well, that is a difficult question for me to answer, because I think that I might get hung up a little bit on the terminology research question. I think that we expect every IUSE project, as I've said before, to generate new knowledge. And what that means is that there must be a question out there that you are addressing in order to generate that new knowledge. Without a question, there's no answer, and without an answer, there is no new understanding. So there has to be a question out there. Now, maybe you arrived at that question by looking at the body of existing knowledge in publications. You know, you've looked at the research that has been done so far, and you've said, okay, with regard to this particular issue, we have learned this amount of information, but we could go one step further. We could learn something more. And that's what this project is going to be about. It's going to be about learning something more about that aspect of it. Now, is that a research question, or is it just a question that is guiding the design of your project? I think it can be just a question that's designing the design of your project, or that's guiding the design of your project. And then I think that as the project goes on, your evaluation can look at whether or not what you are discovering, what you're doing, is providing additional information with respect to that question. Are you generating new knowledge? I'm not sure that that was a good answer for the person who posed it, but I would focus less on using the terminology research question or no research question, and thinking more about just generating something new for the community. We are spending federal money on this project. We are spending public money on this project. There must be something that we gain from that. We must get some new information that can improve STEM undergraduate education. Frankly, I think it boils down to something as simple as that.
Okay, can a project that seeks to improve STEM education employ a humanities component, such as sociology, ethics, or philosophy?
Yes, it certainly can. There's no prohibition against that. I think it's very important to understand that those things should be kind of woven into the STEM experience of the student. But in the real world, we see over the past few years a greater and greater emphasis on such things as ethics in STEM courses and in the STEM profession. So yes, those things can certainly be addressed. It's important to remember that the context is improving STEM undergraduate education.
Is IRB approval required before submitting?
No, IRB approval is not required before submitting. I will say parenthetically that as program officers, we absolutely love it when IRB approval has already been given. But the only reason we love it is because if we are negotiating with a PI for an award, it makes it a lot easier to get all of the work done if we don't have to wait for a long period of time for IRB approval. The truth of the matter is the vast majority of proposals that we see do not have IRB approval ahead of time. We will occasionally, maybe somewhere between occasionally and frequently, see proposals where the PI has submitted a request for IRB approval, and their IRB approval board simply hasn't had a chance to meet yet. So we may get indications that IRB approval is pending. But we certainly also get many proposals where that process hasn't even begun. And the IRB status of the proposal, when it is submitted, will have no influence whatsoever on the likelihood of a recommendation for funding or not. It makes absolutely no difference.
Okay, so for someone who has a level 1 award and is seeking to expand the work to a level 2 or 3 project, will the level 2 or 3 project be evaluated as a brand new project, or does the previous award impact the review of the new proposal?
Well, every submitted proposal is a new award. In the scenario that was described in the question, a team has a level 1. They are going to leverage the results of that level 1 to apply for a level 2. The level 2 would be seen as a new award, certainly. It would be seen as a new project, but it would certainly be a project heavily informed by the previous level 1. So every submitted proposal is required to include a section on prior NSF support. And in this case, the level 2 proposal would be expected to describe the results of the level 1 project in enough detail to convince reviewers and the program officer that the level 1 project was successful, that it produced new information, that it perhaps discovered new questions along the way that may have come out during formative evaluation. And those new questions perhaps are the basis for the level 2 expanded project that takes up kind of the level 1 and goes further, maybe broader. But that foundational work should be described very clearly in the level 2 proposal, and a case made for the fact that that level 1 work kind of set the stage for this new proposal / project.
Okay, so I think we've come to the end of the questions at this point.
Okay, if we are at the end of the questions, we are actually close to the end of time also. I think what I would like to do at this point is thank you all very much for attending this webinar. We appreciate it because it tells us a great deal about the interest in the Ius program in the community. Ius as a program has the opportunity and the power to make great change in undergraduate STEM education, but it only does so by funding great projects, and you are the PIs who will be directing those projects. So we really appreciate your interest, and we appreciate your joining us. Remember, the submission deadline for Ius now, the upcoming submission deadline is July 21st for all levels and all types of Ius projects. And then we have a second deadline in the fiscal year, not the calendar year, but in the fiscal year, on January 19th. And that will be for capacity building and level 1 projects. The other thing I'd like to do is thank my colleagues very much for your work. I guess I would ask if AAAS has anything they want to say. AAAS has done an outstanding job, not only with these webinars, but also with the IUSE summer labs that have been going on and continue to go on this month. So I'll ask if AAAS has anything they want to close out with us.
Keith, we want to thank NSF and thanks to everyone for joining us here for these webinars. Very informative. Thank you so much.
Okay, with that then I'll say take care everyone. Please stay safe. We are anxiously waiting to see the proposals that will come in. We're excited about this next fiscal year and what IUSE has in store through your hard work. Thank you very much.